Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are speaking with Beth Powers. Beth is the Senior Vice President and CHRO and a member of the executive leadership team for ATI, a material science company with more than 8,000 employees working in locations around the United States and serving customers around the world. Beth, thank you so very much for coming down here to speak with me and the students and all of CES. We really appreciate having you here.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
I'd like to start by talking about corporate boards. And it seems in recent years there has been a bit of a trend of having more people with HR experience on boards.
Yeah.
If you agree that that has actually been a trend, can you say a little bit about what that might add to the board's perspective to have someone with that kind of expertise?
I think that's true. I hear that from recruiters that I work with, and I believe that to be true just sort of from what I see and hear in the marketplace myself. You know, it's interesting because I don't think boards have typically thought about having HR professionals, especially in some industries. I've mostly worked in manufacturing and heavy manufacturing, and I don't think that's really been a thing. But you know, a CHRO has experience with, in many cases, they have experience with board refreshment and board searches and board director vetting, and they help the board. They're never making the decision. It's always up to the board chair, the Nom and Gov committee, or whomever is in charge, but they are really the staff person putting together a process, an effective process that not only finds the right board members and the right candidates, but also helps convince those right board members that this is the right board to join. So they're really an important part of that. So that's an experience that they bring to a board. They also, if they've experienced this, are skilled at CEO succession and planning in advance and then executing a thoughtful process that results in a really low risk and a high success potential factor for the CEO that's going to take over from the prior CEO. So that's another skill that boards can use effectively. And then of course there's executive comp, which is kind of everybody's topic. If you're on a publicly traded company board, you need to pay attention to that. And that has become, you know, a lot more rigorous in terms of how shareholders look at it and how the proxy advisors like ISS and Glass Lewis look at your comp plans and alignment with shareholder values. And, you know, even after with COVID and some of the business cyclical issues that occur, you know, having a plan that is retentive and is motivational, but also aligned with shareholder interests is really not just a slam dunk. So having that experience is important. And I think the ESG issues, you know, the E and the S part of it often fall inside CHROs, either their knowledge base or their experience or what they're putting together for the company to execute those kinds of desires from shareholders.
And you mentioned that much of your experience has been in the heavy manufacturing.
Yes.
And you obviously are extremely successful and in the C-suite and all. But heavy manufacturing is not one of the areas that we see many women really achieving the highest ranks. Is there something that we can be doing as a society to do this better?
You know, I always tell people I didn't really expect to end up here. It wasn't a planned career path, but I started in manufacturing. And very interestingly, because there were so few women, I think women who were effective got paid attention to. Unlike, you know, if you're in financial services or retail or hospitality, you know, you really kind of stand out if you're in heavy industry, if you're a woman. And it's true for the material science engineers that we recruit and other women who are in other functions besides HR. So, you know, I think with women, and women especially in HR, one of the most important things is for them to really understand the business, to be good business partners. You hear that all the time about HR, but particularly true for women, and to really understand the financial aspects of the company. They don't have to be an accountant, but they need to understand things like pension liabilities. They need to understand the implications of cash management. They need to be able to put together an effective budget and to manage to that budget. So, you know, all of those skills, I think, are things that women can develop and that companies I feel and hear are paying a lot more attention to in terms of developing women so that they're viewed as full business partners and that they think like a business person and act like a business person.
So you're really suggesting things that women themselves can do, and primarily it's around, at least what I think I heard you say, was really around kind of understanding the finances and the business and whatever. And I heard you actually give that advice to people already also. Take as many of the finance and accounting classes type of things as you can to really get.
Economics, data analytics, any of those things are very useful for HR professionals and certainly useful if you want to be an executive within the company.
And now are there things that structurally we should be putting in place too, or does that go back to helping train women who maybe in the past hadn't been as inclined to pursue some of those careers that were more quantitative?
Yeah. Structurally, I think, some companies actually pay a lot of attention to this, and I think companies can pay attention to making sure the women they have in their business have exposure to those quantitative kinds of functions. From finance, that's the scorecard for the company, right? It's what the shareholders are paying attention to. It's kind of the ultimate scorecard. So that is really what any professional that aspires to be in an executive position needs to pay attention to. So I think structurally companies can do more of that with the women that are in their businesses. I think companies can do more to expose women. That's not a unique thought. Lots of people talk about that. We have a rotational program. We call it our Early Career Leadership Program, and we're recruiting material science engineers because we're a company filled with material science engineers. We're recruiting accountants and finance majors, and we're recruiting digital technology, cybersecurity, those kinds of things into that program. And one of the purposes of the program is to attract a diverse set of candidates with more women and more ethnic diversity, and then rotate them around. So it's a rotational program. So you rotate every year. You get a lot of exposure to people in the business, and we also have them do a presentation to the CEO and the Executive Council every year. So they get exposure to that kind of thing. And I think the women in our program have really shined. It's amazing to see, because I think women sometimes aren't as aggressive about their career desires, and so they'll wait to be noticed. And so structurally, I think it's important for us to notice them.
So another topic that we think about here a lot at the Center for Executive Succession is the general executive leadership team, and from the CEO and all of those direct reports in particular. So one question that always comes up is it really a team, or are the people that are getting to that level really just high individual performers, and we call them a team for convenience?
Anthony, how candid do you want? No, I'm joking. I'm really pleased to say in our business it very much is a team. Now, I think we get very high marks on our engagement surveys for teamwork and respect and collaboration. I think we're known as a very collaborative kind of company, and our new hires say that about us. People are so warm and welcoming. And I think, you will have a company culture by design or default. I say this all the time to people I talk to. So it's important to design it. But if you haven't done it, you haven't created a deliberate design, it's often a function of the CEO and then the people they choose to work for them, who will naturally be sort of exhibit the behavioral characteristics that the CEO likes, and then the people that executive team chooses. So if you've had a history of having CEOs that are very people-oriented and collaborative and value teamwork, you will have, several years of that kind of behavior, A, being modeled, and B, selecting people who behave that way as well. I don't think that's true at every company, so I can't speak for other companies, of course. But I think there's a common misperception about executives. They are high achievers, and they are very competitive. Many of them are competitive within themselves. They're not competitive with their peer. They are constant learners. They're continuous learners. They're curious. They are hard workers. They have a very strong work ethic, and so they're always looking to beat. And I use that term cautiously, to beat their best performance from before, to improve something, to look at something that's not working, that's within their area of responsibility, and say, how can we do better? So they're looking really kind of within themselves and within their own teams to improve first. They're not competing with their peer, You know, if they're the operations leader, they're not competing with the CFO. They want to do better as the operations leader. And so I think the best executives are those kinds of people, and they really lend themselves to creating a good team that's thinking about the enterprise first.
And are there then clear strengths of having that group really function well as a team? I mean, it seems kind of an obvious question, I think, and certainly a leading one.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, when you say strengths, I think certainly being a continuous learner is important. Having a certain amount of humility, you know, you've heard the term servant leader, which I think is important. We talk about that. It's not a big thing within our business, but we certainly talk about that importance of humility, which doesn't mean that you're not assertive. It doesn't mean that you're, you know, anything unrelated to being a high achiever. What it really means is that you don't think you have all the answers, and you're willing to come into a situation and sort of the Stephen Covey principle, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I think that's a really important characteristic for good leaders.
And as someone with great HR experience and the head of HR, do you then either formally or informally take on responsibility for helping that team be more cohesive?
I try to.
Okay.
You know, everybody's an individual, right? And when you're at that level, you're going to have a lot of individuals who, and I always say this is not exactly relevant to your question, but when you're in HR, everybody's an expert in managing people, right? I would never purport to be an expert in material science engineering. I'd go to our expert leader and ask questions about it, or in finance or accounting. But that's not true in HR. So if you're in HR, it's really important to have a level of humility, because lots of people are going to have good ideas about how to lead their own teams, career mobility ideas. Our general counsel recently suggested one of his lawyers to take on a business unit leadership role. It was a brilliant suggestion. I wish I had thought of it. But, you know, people are going to have good ideas about how to manage human beings. And human beings are complex, and the interaction between human beings are complex. And everybody in a leadership role is managing them and working as a team member. So yes, I try to help facilitate that teamwork, but I'm not the only one. Our CEO does that, and everybody on the team does it. I think, you know, I used to work for somebody who said, you have two jobs here, Beth. You are leading the function, and you are also a member of the leadership team. And as such, everybody here has that role to make sure that we're all functioning effectively.
So that's a really interesting position that kind of everyone on that executive leadership team has, right? That they're responsible for their own team, whether it's finance or marketing or HR, and they're part of that executive leadership team. How do you balance those? How do you make sure that you're still leading your team as in its best possible way, and making sure that you're helping the kind of larger enterprise best? Or are those? I'm assuming they're not entirely and necessarily in sync.
No, that's probably true, but it's probably a lot like the balance of managing the execution of day-to-day activities and also being strategic at the same time. You know, we all know leaders who are really strong in one area and really weak in another, and the most successful leaders are good at both. You find a way to move the ball forward even while you're administering the paychecks for employees to make sure they get paid, which is something, by the way, that you cannot let fail. So how do you manage your own function and still be a member of the leadership team and be part of the business of making decisions and helping the team be effective and functioning as a team? I think, you know, you become skilled at balancing those things. They're not in conflict with each other. They're not mutually exclusive. It may be more an issue of where are you spending your energy and your time and your focus, but they're really not in conflict with each other.
And you also described the need to have humility as being an HR leader, yeah. And I'm sure that must be throughout the organization, from the early HR business partner all the way up to the CHRO. How do you really make sure that you're keeping that appropriate level of humility such that you can help guide and encourage others without getting just so frustrated, like, hey, this is my turf?
Yeah. You know, I'm thinking about my kids right now, who would probably be laughing at me and saying, Mom, you're anything but, you know, somebody who's very directive and telling people what to do. But, and I am, you know, high energy person, and I I like to get things across the finish line. So managing that need to kind of like, look, can we just make a decision here and move on before the opportunity is ripe for that, before it's been vetted appropriately while people are still feeling uncomfortable, is a challenge I have. I mean, I try to manage it, not always successfully, but I think, that is going to be one of the occupational hazards of people who are at an executive level. They're probably all going to have a characteristic that is all about getting things across the finish line. So there will be some conflict on some of those things. There will be people who will be like, look, we just need to move in this direction. I know what that direction is. It's sort of a no-brainer. Let's stop debating this. But if you really are focused on the team and making the team functional and bringing the team along with you, much like you would lead your own department, if half the department is feeling like you're going in a wrong direction, you want to know that, and you want to vet that, and you want to make sure you're taking those considerations seriously, and whatever that risk factor is, you want to be sure you're mitigating against that risk. It's no different when it's your peer group. So I think we all work at it, and my peers would probably say the same thing. They actively work at it.
Now, shifting a little bit to some of the lessons from the pandemic. So, one, we know that it's been extremely stressful on many people around the world. How does that affect, or does it affect, how you think about interacting with your employees and kind of their day-to-day worlds?
It's interesting how much things have changed from March of 2020, when I think there were many people who thought that some of us were making a mountain out of a molehill, and other people who thought, wow, they could see the future. This is really serious, and we need to take it seriously, and we're going to be hit with economic issues, we're going to be hit with individual people issues, we're going to be hit with health and safety issues, and so on. So I'm thinking back to those March 2020 days when I actually had one of my colleagues come into my office and say, Beth, you need to dial up your empathy. So, fair point, actually. And I think we all sort of went through that transition of, what's really going to happen here. The other interesting thing is we don't know a lot about people's personal lives if we're work colleagues. There's so many people that you learn over time have a health issue that you didn't know about. They seem perfectly fine on the outside, or live with a child that has an immune compromised system with serious health issues, or have their parents living at home with them, or they're in a nursing home and they visit them regularly. Those kinds of family issues that I think have really become a lot more obvious to everyone. Certainly the HR function, but obvious to everyone. There's still many people in our business, not the majority at all, small minority really, they're extremely nervous about COVID, and despite the fact that they're vaccinated, and maybe all of their colleagues are vaccinated, and we have social distancing rules, and we have masking rules, and all of that, are very concerned about coming into the office and want to work fully remote, and we're accommodating that. Pre-pandemic, that would have been almost unthinkable, but we've pivoted like many other companies have pivoted, and in manufacturing, that's a harder pivot because 70% of our employees have been coming into work every day and have to come into work to produce our products. And probably 50% of our salaried employees directly support the production process. So they've been coming in regularly. So, but our workplace is very safe. And this is not true of every workplace, but we're not on top of each other. So for us, and I think this is true for some manufacturers, in heavy industry, this is not really a workplace safety issue. We have only a handful of workplace transmissions. It's really more of a public health issue and a comfort level for employees relative to their own, how do they think about it, and what are their personal situations, and how can we accommodate them in this environment.
And even though it's not a real workplace safety issue, you say, because of the way you're structured and the care that you've taken as a company, but empathy is still, that's one of the big lessons that comes out, that to treat maybe everybody, but especially employees within the organization with more empathy. Did I hear that right?
Yes, you did. And I, I said earlier, we are a very team-oriented, kind of collaborative culture, and sort of known for that a bit in terms of how new employees come in and experience us, and engagement surveys and so on. So you'd think that I mean, we certainly didn't have a lack of empathy pre-COVID, but I think that awareness of how individuals react in certain situations is really sort of what D&I is about, isn't it? It's really about, you know, you might be part of a cohort, a department, or an industry, or a particular company, but you are also an individual, and you have individual concerns and individual issues, and how do we deal with that? So I think that empathy really is less about a group and a kind of a category and a characteristic, and more about how do we deal with the individual in these circumstances.
Are there additional lessons that you pull out in terms of either dealing with employees or just generally that you're taking away from things that you've learned during the pandemic?
I think it's interesting to me what's happening now, the great sort of sorting. Korn Ferry refers to it as the great resignation. And I've talked to some of our employees who have young kids, young adults, but early career family members who are working in companies that have said, we're going to be 100% remote. You don't need to come into the office anymore at all. And they don't like that. They're leaving because they want that social interaction. Now, that doesn't mean they want to be there 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. They probably want some hybrid environment, but they don't want that kind of scenario. So those employees, the people who feel that way, are sorting themselves out from that kind of business. There are other businesses that have said, we are really an in-person business. We want you back at work, and we kind of want you back at work full time. Okay, you can work from home occasionally on a Friday, but we basically want you in. And there are employees who don't like that. So they're sorting themselves out from that kind of company. And then there's the hybrid approach, of course. And there are, we're in a very tight labor market. In the U.S., 11 million job openings, 7 million people on unemployment. It's just a phenomenal. I think the unemployment levels for accountants and finance and engineers is like 1%. It's amazing. So there's I think a huge realignment among employees in terms of where they want to work and how they're going to work, and how do we appeal to that environment. How do we sell ourselves? The balance of power has really changed in many ways. The first interview used to be 80% the candidates selling themselves and 20% us wanting them to feel like they want to work for us when they leave, but we're not sure whether we're going to select them or not. But that's because they applied for our job. Now we're going on LinkedIn and Indeed, and we're finding candidates and calling them and saying, hey, are you interested in this job? Let us send you the job description. Now it's 80-20 in the other direction. We're spending 80% of that first interaction encouraging them to think about our company, ATI, as a good place to work and a good career path and so on, and 20% finding out about them. So that's a really interesting dynamic that businesses and economies go in cycles, so that'll sort itself out over time. But for now, I think has been a real learning for a lot of employers. How do we deal with this desire of employees to have a different kind of relationship with work, and what do they want? They don't all want to work from home 100% of the time. That's not satisfying to many people. And then also, how do we get in a mode of really positioning ourselves to have an employee value proposition that we can sell to on a cold call?
So this remarkable disruption period that you described, and recognizing that employees are going to sort themselves into whatever their preference may be, right, particularly in terms of working location and times, et cetera. But are there things that I think you were hinting at that at the very end about the employee value proposition. Are there things that you point to that you think will be characteristics or traits of companies that will end up doing much better than others as we come out of this disruption period, however long that would be?
Well, I think the companies that can have that one-to-one relationship, however that sorts itself out, and you've heard that in marketing circles and kind of on a commercial basis, starting a decade ago at least, in terms of how do companies market to an individual consumer with individual wants and desires and so on, and technology allowed that to happen. I think technology is allowing that to happen to a certain extent now with things like Zoom and Teams and automation for certain types of tasks. So as we begin to think about employees more as individuals as opposed to part of a cohort, there's this near retirement group that's really interested in the 401k plan or the pension plan or the retirement plan, and there's the early career person who really is interested in vacation but not so interested in the healthcare plan. We I think have tended to, because it's easier and it's convenient to think about employees in terms of the cohort they're in, the group they're in. I think we're going to have to think much more about individuals, that one-to-one relationship, in terms of what does this individual employee, what are they interested, what do they want, and how can we satisfy that as an employer?
So that sounds like a really remarkable transition and a major way of changing how HR deals with people in organizations. Is that something like for a while, it was really popular to have kind of cafeteria style healthcare plans of what you could choose. But are you now saying companies that do really well at this are going to be doing that kind of across the board? Like you gave the example of pay versus vacation versus... Yeah. So do you see more like really individualizing like that?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure I've thought that far ahead. So, when we think about benefits, they usually apply to a group. Culture applies to a group. You line of sight and the mission of the organization, when you think about the employee value proposition or the total rewards model, there are certain things that really apply to a group. You can't separate them by individual. Will benefits evolve to be a much more individualized kind of thing where you can kind of design, you monetize it basically, and you can kind of design exactly what you want to spend as an individual on your benefits plan? Possibly. I think technology allows a lot of things that in the past haven't been feasible or haven't been practical. But I think more I'm thinking about employee development, the way we onboard people, the leadership, the supervisory relationship that a supervisor has with each member of their team. I think it's always been true that employers who have capability to deal with individuals have been very successful. And you think about the pre-industrial environment in any society before there were big conglomerates, the craft houses were, those were all kind of one-to-one relationships, and people progressed at whatever speed they wanted to, depending on the skills they could generate, and some of them broke off and started their own businesses and so on. We're thinking about these behemoth organizations like Amazon or Walmart back in the day, or Microsoft or Facebook. I think that there's probably less individualism that is, again, feasible or allowed or practical, but as we evolve and can use technology to help us, and we think more in a more sophisticated way about leadership attributes, I think there is going to be a need, especially in the labor market we're in, because think about the power dynamic of having 11 million jobs open and 7 million unemployed people, and this great realignment that employees are having, where they can really kind of say, this is the kind of company I want to work for, this is the culture, this is the type of leader, this is the kind of work I want to do. I think the successful companies are going to be the ones that really figure out how to customize that experience.
And so does that customization, does that mean a much stronger relationship between the organization at large and each individual, like making sure that every individual has at least their own opportunity, they have their own career plan, whether it works out or not, but at least kind of an idea of what they want to do, and the organization recognizes that? Or is that more about making sure that leaders within each group are better in terms of appreciating and taking care of their employees and empathizing with their employees and working with them, or some combination?
I'll speak for my own company. I hope it's both. And I would think any company would hope it's both. On the former, in terms of career path and career plans, I think many companies have been on that path for a number of years, and very successful companies do that really well. I think manufacturing tends to be a bit behind the eight ball in terms of, it's naturally a more conservative environment. There's a much less turnover in manufacturing. So, unlike retail and hospitality industry and banking and financial services, there's just a very low turnover rate in manufacturing. So manufacturers haven't had to think about those things as much. You tend to have lifetime employment, even in the salary professional ranks. So I think manufacturing as a whole needs to catch up. But I think a lot of quality companies that are in heavy industry have been doing that kind of work for a long time. But that leadership, the emphasis on having really effective leaders, I think is perhaps a newer thought, or we're getting more sophisticated about how to figure out who are the effective leaders and what are their key attributes and how can we help less effective leaders develop, because everything gets better with good leadership. Retention improves, opportunities for employees improve, satisfaction, line of sight, communication, everything gets better with good leaders. So I think in human resources as a whole, we're getting more sophisticated about how to think about it, and frankly, technology is helping.
And then presumably also how to help leaders become better?
Of course.
Is that part of HR's
absolutely.
role?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, almost every topic that comes up these days, whether that's working from home or vaccines or DE&I things, seems to create great polarization. Right? Half the people agree and half disagree on any topic these days. How should organizations walk the line of whether it's making statements, taking opinions, or CEOs taking opinions on kind of any topic?
I will never presume to prescribe for other organizations. So I'm not sure I'm qualified to prescribe for my own organization. But I do think that companies need to be very thoughtful about the path they're taking and recognize that they probably have a wide variety of perspectives within one company. So, we see headlines from like the diversity training of Coca-Cola and some of those issues and we see it in school districts as well. I mean, right now there's a political contest going on in Virginia, and the Loudoun, I think that's how you pronounce it, county school district is in the news. Those poor school board members probably never thought, I shouldn't say poor school board members because I'm probably alienating a lot of parents, probably never thought they'd be in national news. But just laughing about that or making that point kind of speaks to those extremes. Within one county, you have this very polarizing situation. And I think that's similar within workplaces. There are going to be people who feel very strongly in one direction and very strongly and other people feel very strongly in another direction. And we are more polarized about a lot of things. Social justice issues, D&I issues, COVID, vax to vax or not to vax. So I think it's important for leadership teams to realize that they're running a business. So is it really necessary to get very political? My opinion would be it is not. Sticking to the idea that we're running a business is important. And that's consistent with how we'd advise employees to behave. We don't want employees doing a lot of extracurricular things that are not related to the business during their day job, right? They can do it on their own at night, but pay attention to the business, don't have an agenda that is your own agenda, do what's best for the enterprise and for the shareholders or whoever owns the business. That's perhaps the first thing that I think is important for businesses to think about. How are we going to recognize that we are A, a business, and B, lead a very broad group of people who are all individuals and who have a variety of different perspectives, and try not to pigeonhole people in certain categories or certain cohorts. And last, but most important, is kind of the rule of D&I inclusivity. Recognize people for their individual contributions, not for belonging to a particular ethnicity or a particular gender or a particular sexual orientation or a particular function. In HR, if you're in manufacturing, you always feel a little inferior. So, how do we recognize that everybody has something to offer and that they think and act as individuals as opposed to part of a cohort?
And I've heard you talk about two most important skills, or at least two extremely important skills for HR professionals, is to have courage and good judgment. Can you say a little bit about what you mean by that and why those are skills that pop into your mind as being critical for great HR leaders?
Sure. HR is not like an engineering degree. So, there are certain functions that you really need to know the technical aspects of the job. Otherwise, you could put somebody's life in danger. And that's true in our business. We have a very, very technical company. And quality is critical, and so you're not going to hire, for instance, a non-engineer to do an engineer's job. You're not going to hire a non-accountant to do an accountant's job. HR is the kind of function where I think lots of different people from lots of backgrounds can be successful. And we have in our function, in our company, we have engineers, people who have engineering degrees, people who have finance degrees, people who have all kinds of different degrees. So it's not technical from that purist perspective. Now there are technical aspects, compensation, benefits, labor law, that kind of thing. But really the most important thing is you just repeated my words back to me, I'm glad they resonated, courage and judgment. So exercising courage is a tricky thing. You need to walk the line again of being a bit humble and understanding that you don't necessarily have all the answers, but being courageous enough to speak up when you think that there is an integrity issue at play or a moral question. You know, if we have unions in our business, are we exercising the same kinds of requirements with our union members that we are with our non-union employees? I think that's a really important moral question for companies to pay a lot of attention to, and I'm pleased to say at our company we do. But HR leaders need to speak up and talk about that. And I've used the word moral. I think this is a moral question when I'm talking to some of my peers and our leaders. And then the judgment factor, I think, is true of anybody who's in a leadership position, and particularly the higher you go, the more important it is. But again, that's sort of the working concept and construct of HR is you're always dealing with the human element. You're always dealing with human beings. You're not making a product. You're not counting the money you've made. You're not reporting on you're not ordering supplies. If you're in supply chain, you're dealing with human beings. So using good judgment is really critical, and being able to stand up for how that judgment is communicated and how it's exercised in a company.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time here. Thank you for coming down to visit us. We sincerely appreciate having you here.
Well, thank you very much, Anthony. It's been my pleasure. I've really enjoyed visiting the school.
You just listened to another CHRO conversation. Today, Beth Powers of ATI shared her views regarding the role of HR as a strategic partner in driving business success. She also shared her thoughts about how the CHRO's role can help influence the culture, something that is ever more important during times of great labor challenges. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.